The Nexus Military Academy had processed exactly 47,312 applications this cycle. Of those, roughly 8,000 came from species that still believed honor could be won through ritualized combat. Another 12,000 originated from civilizations that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel and thought this qualified them for strategic leadership. The remaining applicants fell into the usual categories: trust fund offspring from core worlds seeking glory without consequence, actual military prodigies, and the occasional statistical anomaly. Cadet Zara 9 appeared to belong firmly in the anomaly column. She stood in processing queue 7, between a towering Veltarian whose carapace gleamed with ceremonial battle scars and a cluster of hive mind drones who moved in perfect synchronization. Her uniform hung slightly loose. Standard Academy issue never quite fit the shorter humanoid species properly, and she carried a single duffel bag that looked like it had survived at least 3 different wars. The Veltarian clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his kind. "Earthspawn," he rumbled, his voice carrying the resonance of a species that had conquered 17 star systems before developing written language. "Tell me, soft skin, does your world still practice combat with metal sticks?" The question drew attention from nearby queues. A Cyphorian cadet, all crystalline angles and electromagnetic fury, pulsed with amused colors. "Kreshvor, you assume they have progressed beyond throwing rocks." "Actually," Zara 9 said, adjusting the strap on her duffel, "we mostly switched to kinetic projectiles fired from chemically powered tubes, much more efficient than sticks." The honesty in her voice made it worse. Several cadets exchanged glances that suggested they were witnessing something between tragedy and comedy. "Chemical propulsion." The Cyphorian's pattern shifted to something resembling pity. "How quaint. Do you also navigate by celestial bodies?" "Sometimes," Zara 9 replied. "Stars don't malfunction." Kreshvor's mandibles clicked faster. "Hear that, Crystal Brain? Their ships break down so often they memorize star charts. Perhaps she navigates by following the scent trails of more advanced civilizations." The processing line shuffled forward. Around them, the Academy's main hall hummed with the efficiency of a military installation that had been accepting cadets from across the galaxy for over 3 millennia. Holographic displays showed tactical simulations, recruitment propaganda, and scrolling lists of achievements that belonged to graduates who now commanded fleets, governed sectors, or held other positions of significance. None of the achievements belonged to humans. "I am curious," said a new voice. The speaker emerged from Q5, a Zenthari whose species had perfected warfare while most civilizations were still learning to make fire. His skin bore the ritual markings of someone who had witnessed actual combat, not the decorative scarification popular among Academy posers. "Your species submitted 14 applications this cycle. Why so few?" Zara 9 considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Population bottleneck. We had some domestic disagreements that reduced our numbers significantly." "Ah, civil warfare." The Zenthari nodded approvingly. "How many factions survived?" "All of them, eventually. We worked it out. The approval vanished." "All factions survived a civil war?" "Well, we had several. Most species go through a phase where they try to exterminate portions of themselves. We just did it more thoroughly than usual, then figured out better ways to manage the underlying problems." The casual way she delivered this information created an uncomfortable silence. Civil wars that ended with all factions intact suggested either impressive restraint or terrifying efficiency. Neither interpretation fit with the prevailing assumptions about primitive Earth dwellers. Kreshvor recovered first. "How wonderfully civilized. I suppose your people resolve all conflicts through lengthy discussions and mutual compromise." "Not exactly," Zara 9 said. We tried that approach with a few external threats. The results were mixed. Before anyone could ask what she meant by external threats, the processing line reached the security checkpoint. The scanner occupied a space that could accommodate the largest known sentient species. Its array of sensors could detect everything from concealed weapons to genetic modifications to psychological instabilities that might manifest under stress. The technology represented the accumulated security expertise of dozens of civilizations, refined over centuries of Academy operations. Kreshvor stepped through first. The scanner hummed, displayed a brief holographic summary of his species' military traditions, and chimed approval. Standard procedure for a Veltorian with appropriate credentials. The Cyphorian followed. Light patterns danced across his crystalline form as the scanner analyzed electromagnetic signatures, confirmed his psychic stability ratings, and verified his academic records. Another soft chime. The Zenthari warrior moved through with barely a pause. His combat history appeared briefly in holographic script, marking him as a legitimate applicant with relevant experience. The scanner acknowledged his passage with mechanical indifference. Then Zara 9 approached the threshold. The scanner activated normally, beginning its standard analysis protocol. For approximately 3 seconds, everything proceeded according to established procedures. Then something changed. The scanner's hum shifted to a higher frequency. Warning lights that hadn't illuminated in decades began flashing in sequence. The holographic display flickered, showing fragments of data that scrolled too quickly to read. Species classification systems cycled through multiple databases, rejecting each result. Finally, the display stabilized on a message that no one in the immediate area had ever seen before. Earthborn detected classification. Legacy quarantine protocol. Status: do not engage without authorization. Refer to extinct Dominion archives. Advisory level. Maximum. The scanner's warning chime didn't sound like approval or denial. It sounded like an air raid siren. Processing queue. 7 fell silent. Conversations in nearby queues trailed off as attention focused on the source of the disturbance. Academy staff emerged from stations they had been manning with routine efficiency, their expressions shifting from mild curiosity to something approaching concern. Well, Zara 9 said, studying the display with academic interest. That's new. Kreshvor's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. What does extinct Dominion archives mean? I have no idea, she replied, which was probably the truth. Should I step back and try again? A Christian administrator approached the scanner, her movements careful and deliberate. Her species had maintained the Academy's bureaucratic infrastructure for over 800 years, and she carried herself with the authority of someone who had seen every possible variation of student crisis. Cadet designation? She inquired, though her tone suggested this had become significantly more than a routine processing question. Zara 9, applying for the strategic analysis track. The administrator consulted a handheld device, cross-referencing databases with practiced efficiency. Your application indicates standard Earth-human physiology, no genetic modifications, no previous military experience, correct? Correct. Any family history of contact with pre-spaceflight civilizations? Any ancestors who might have encountered older galactic powers? Zara 9 considered this carefully. Define older. Species or political entities that existed before the current galactic cooperative was established. Most of human history happened before we knew the galactic cooperative existed, so probably yes. Is that a problem? The administrator's expression suggested that yes, it might be exactly that kind of problem. She tapped her device several more times, each input generating results that seemed to increase rather than resolve her concern. I need to contact my supervisor, she said finally. Please wait here while we clarify your admission status. As she walked away, speaking rapidly into her communication device, the alien cadets who had been mocking Zara 9 found themselves studying her with new interest. The casual dismissal they had shown earlier was replaced by something more complicated. The scanner continued displaying its warning message, the words pulsing in colors that suggested this was not a routine advisory. Extinct Dominion, the Zenthari muttered. I have heard fragments of that term in historical archives. Something about the previous Galactic Order, before the Cooperative, was established. Previous Galactic Order? Zara 9 asked. A military empire that controlled most of the known galaxy approximately 700 years ago. They maintained strict protocols about species classification and contact procedures, but they disappeared during some kind of internal collapse. Most of their records were lost. Or deliberately destroyed, added the Cyphorian, his color patterns shifting to something resembling unease. There are theories that the Cooperative intentionally suppressed information about the Dominion to prevent their authoritarian policies from being revived. Zara 9 nodded as if this was mildly interesting historical trivia rather than information that appeared to be directly relevant to her current situation. Around them, more Academy staff began congregating near the scanner. Their conversations were too quiet to overhear, but their body language suggested they were dealing with a situation that fell well outside standard operating procedures. The scanner's warning display continued pulsing, casting red light across faces that had expected this to be just another routine day of processing overconfident young warriors from across the galaxy. None of them had expected to encounter a reference to protocols that predated their entire civilization's understanding of how galactic society was supposed to function. Director Velketh had been managing Academy admissions for 37 years, during which time she had encountered precisely 0 situations that required accessing the forbidden archives. The crystalline formations across her forehead, markers of age and wisdom among her people, flickered with patterns that indicated deep analytical processing. Her office occupied the Academy's administrative spire, its walls lined with holographic displays showing enrollment statistics, tactical simulations, and commendation records. Currently, every screen showed variations of the same troubling data. Security alerts that shouldn't exist, database queries returning impossible results, and communication logs documenting conversations that made no sense. "Explain it again," she said to technical specialist Korth Prime, whose multi-limbed form was currently interfaced with 3 separate computational systems simultaneously. "The warning isn't a malfunction." Korth Prime's synthesized voice carried undertones of professional frustration. "I ran full diagnostics on the scanning array, cross-referenced threat assessment protocols, and verified all recent software updates. The system is functioning perfectly. Then why is it referencing archives that supposedly don't exist? Because they do exist. They're just locked behind security clearances that predate current Academy authorization structures." Velketh's forehead patterns shifted to something resembling a headache. "You're telling me our security systems have access to databases that we don't?" Legacy integration. When the Academy was established, they incorporated existing infrastructure from previous educational institutions. Those institutions apparently inherited systems from even older sources. The scanning technology recognizes authorization codes and classification schemes that were established centuries before our current protocols. This explanation raised more questions than it answered. Academy records indicated that the institution had been built on an uninhabited world using entirely new construction. There shouldn't have been any legacy systems to inherit. "Show me the archived data," Velketh commanded. "I can't." Access requires director-level authorization plus confirmation from at least 3 department heads, plus what appears to be something called a species endangerment waiver that I can't find any documentation for. Through her office's viewport, Velkath could observe the main courtyard where the human cadet remained in temporary custody. Security personnel had established a discreet perimeter, though they seemed unclear about whether they were protecting other students from her or protecting her from institutional panic. What does the preliminary scan data tell us about her personally? Korth Prime's limbs manipulated controls with mechanical precision. Standard human physiology, no cybernetic enhancements, no genetic modifications detectable by our equipment. Academic records indicate above-average performance in theoretical studies, particularly military history and strategic analysis. No criminal background, no previous contact with Academy personnel. Family background? Parents listed as civilian academics. No military service records in our databases. Her application essay discusses an interest in comparative warfare studies and mentions a thesis project analyzing extinct civilization military doctrines. The last detail created an uncomfortable resonance with their current situation. What exactly was her thesis about? Something called Tactical Evolution in Post-Hegemony Power Structures, a study of Dominion-era strategic frameworks. Velkath's crystalline formations went completely dark for several seconds. When they resumed their normal patterns, they carried a significantly brighter intensity. She wrote an academic paper about Dominion military tactics. Apparently, her application materials reference primary source documentation and archaeological evidence from multiple worlds. The bibliography alone runs to 47 pages. Primary sources. She found primary sources about a civilization that was supposedly obliterated 7 centuries ago, leaving minimal records. According to her research notes, she located intact archives on 17 different worlds. Most of them were classified as archaeological sites of unknown origin by current survey teams. Director Velkath activated her emergency communication system. Within minutes, department heads began materializing in her office via holographic projection. Professor Thane Carr from Military History looked particularly agitated, his scaled features displaying the aggressive patterns typical of draconian academics under stress. "You're telling me," Thane Carr began without preamble, "that a first-year applicant from a primitive world has conducted more comprehensive research into Dominion civilization than our entire historical studies department." "That appears to be the case," Velkath confirmed. "Impossible. Dominion records were systematically purged during the transition wars. What survived was fragmented, encrypted, and scattered across thousands of worlds. It would take decades of coordinated archaeological effort to piece together anything coherent. Strategic studies." Head Vex Nolan's projection flickered as he accessed his own databases. "I'm reviewing her application materials now. This thesis. These aren't fragments. These are complete operational manuals, strategic assessments, and what appears to be comprehensive analysis of Dominion fleet tactics during major campaigns." How does a human undergraduate acquire documentation that eluded professional historians for 7 centuries? Asked Cultural Analysis Director Yith Mull, whose species had perfected the art of extracting information from supposedly lost civilizations. "More importantly," Thane Carr interjected, "how does she read it?" Dominion texts were written in languages that died with their empire. The translation protocols alone would require computational resources beyond anything available to individual researchers. Velkath pulled up Zara 9's academic transcripts. According to her undergraduate records, she speaks fluent ancient Dominion script, classical hegemony trade language, and something called military administrative syntax that I don't recognize. Military administrative syntax was the official language used for classified Dominion operations, Vex Nolan said quietly. Knowledge of it was restricted to command-level personnel and specialized intelligence units. The language structure was deliberately designed to be untranslatable by conventional methods. The room fell silent as the implications settled. A human student had somehow acquired linguistic knowledge that was supposed to have died with the military elite of an extinct empire. "There's something else," Korth Prime announced, his mechanical voice cutting through the contemplative quiet. "I've been monitoring Academy-wide communication networks since the security alert began. Several students have started researching Earth's historical records. And they're finding significant discrepancies. Official galactic cooperative databases list Earth as achieving spaceflight approximately 200 years ago, with first interstellar contact occurring 150 years later. But archaeological surveys of human colony worlds suggest much earlier expansion dates. Professor Thane Carr's scales shifted to deeper aggressive patterns. How much earlier? At least 400 years, possibly more. There are human settlements on worlds that were supposedly first contacted by cooperative exploration teams. But the settlements show evidence of continuous occupation dating back to the Dominion period. The silence that followed was the kind that accompanies the realization that fundamental assumptions about reality might be incorrect. "You're suggesting," Director Velketh said carefully, "that humans were spacefaring during the Dominion era, and somehow this information was removed from official records? I'm suggesting that either our historical databases are incomplete, or someone has been very selective about which information gets preserved and which gets forgotten." Vex Nolan's projection intensified as he accessed classified military archives. "I'm cross-referencing Dominion military records with current galactic political structures. There are patterns here that don't make sense unless the Dominion didn't fall through internal collapse." "What do you mean? What if they were defeated? What if the transition wars weren't a period of gradual political evolution, but an actual military campaign against Dominion forces?" The question hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance device. "If that's true," Thane Carr said slowly, "then someone won a war against the most powerful military empire in recorded galactic history, then systematically erased evidence of both the conflict and their own involvement." Through the viewport, Zara 9 remained in the courtyard, apparently content to wait while Academy officials attempted to understand why their security systems were treating her like a potential planetary-scale threat. She had removed a book from her duffel and was reading with the focused attention of someone catching up on leisure material during an unexpected delay. Director Velketh activated her office's high-resolution viewing system to identify the book's title. Tactical Fundamentals of Deep Strike Operations, a comparative study of Dominion and post-Dominion military doctrine. The author was listed as Zara 9. "Gentlemen," Velketh announced, "I believe we need those archives opened immediately." The Forbidden Archives existed in a section of the Academy that most personnel had never seen. 3 levels below the main structure, behind security barriers that required biometric confirmation from species that had been extinct for centuries, lay storage systems that predated the Academy's official construction by approximately 400 years. Director Velketh stood before a vault door that shouldn't have existed, holding authorization codes that shouldn't have worked, preparing to access information that shouldn't have survived. The irony wasn't lost on her that they needed a human undergraduate's research to understand why their own security systems were malfunctioning. The vault opened with mechanical precision that suggested regular maintenance, despite official records indicating it had never been accessed. Inside, holographic storage matrices hummed with power that had been drawing from the Academy's main grid for decades without appearing in any energy consumption reports. The data architecture was elegant, sophisticated, and completely incompatible with current galactic information standards. "How much storage capacity are we looking at?" asked Korth Prime, whose mechanical appendages were already interfacing with access ports that seemed designed for his species' technology. Approximately 47 petabytes of classified information, he announced after a moment, cross-indexed, encrypted, and organized according to threat assessment protocols that treat entire species as potential military targets. The first files they accessed were personnel records, names, species designations, service histories, and performance evaluations for military units that had fought campaigns across star systems that were now peaceful cooperative member worlds. "Look at these unit designations," Professor Thane-Carr said, his scaled features reflecting the glow of tactical displays. 3rd Human Expeditionary Force, 12th Earth Strategic Command, Human Deep Strike Battalion 77 Alpha. Humans had numbered fleets? Vex Nolan's voice carried the tone of someone watching their professional expertise become obsolete in real time. Multiple strategic commands? Deep strike capabilities? The records painted a picture that contradicted everything the Academy taught about galactic military history. Human units were listed not as auxiliary forces or recent additions to Dominion structure, but as primary combat formations with operational autonomy and specialized mission profiles. "Here," Korth Prime announced, highlighting a section of tactical analysis. Battle of Kepler 779. Dominion forces commanded by Human Strategic Group Omicron successfully eliminated hegemony defensive positions using what they term psychological warfare tactics and adaptive logistics coordination. Psychological warfare? Thane-Carr accessed the detailed files. They convinced an entire star system to surrender by demonstrating mathematical proof that continued resistance would result in complete economic collapse within 18 months, followed by ecological failure within 36 months, regardless of military outcomes. They calculated their way to victory? According to this, they presented hegemony leadership with comprehensive models showing exactly how their civilization would end if the war continued, then offered alternative scenarios demonstrating sustainable post-conflict recovery. The hegemony surrendered to avoid extinction, then requested permission to join the attacking force as allied units. Vex Nolan was accessing parallel records. This pattern repeats across dozens of campaigns. Human forces rarely engaged in direct military action. Instead, they analyzed enemy civilizations, identified critical vulnerabilities, and presented mathematical proofs demonstrating why continued resistance was logically untenable. They won wars by convincing their opponents that losing was the optimal strategic choice? More than that. Look at these post-conflict reports. Species that surrendered to human forces experienced immediate improvements in technological development, economic stability, and territorial security. Joining the war against the Dominion became the most beneficial decision these civilizations ever made. The archives contained detailed analyses of human tactical doctrine, written by Dominion observers who seemed simultaneously impressed and disturbed by what they were documenting. Subject species demonstrates unprecedented ability to synthesize information from multiple sources and extrapolate long-term consequences of complex interactions, read one report. Recommendation: do not engage human forces in prolonged conflict scenarios. Their analytical capabilities improve exponentially under stress conditions. Listen to this assessment, Thane-Carr said, reading from a file marked with threat indicators that glowed like warning beacons. Human military units display adaptive behavior that suggests collective intelligence beyond individual cognitive capacity, suspected capability, intuitive understanding of opponent psychology combined with rapid tactical evolution during active operations. Suspected capability? Korth Prime's mechanical voice carried electronic undertones of disbelief. They're describing humans as if they were some kind of war-optimized hive mind. Read the next section. Confirmed. Human forces demonstrate what appears to be species-wide tactical coordination without detectable communication infrastructure. Units separated by interstellar distances respond to changing battlefield conditions with synchronized precision. Hypothesis: genetic predisposition toward strategic thinking combined with cultural emphasis on competitive scenario planning. The files documented campaigns where human forces had systematically dismantled the Dominion's military structure, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through tactical innovation that made traditional warfare obsolete. "Here's the final strategic assessment," Vex Nolan announced, his voice quiet with something approaching awe. Classification: existential threat level maximum. Recommendation: species-wide quarantine with minimal contact protocols. Justification: human analytical capabilities represent fundamental threat to established galactic power structures. "They weren't defeated," Director Velketh said, understanding finally crystallizing. "The Dominion quarantined Earth because they were afraid of humans, not because humans were primitive." "Look at the dates on these files," Thane Carr added. "The quarantine was established immediately after human forces demonstrated ability to predict and counter Dominion tactical doctrine with perfect accuracy. The last entry suggests they were developing countermeasures for weapons and strategies that hadn't been invented yet." Korth Prime accessed another section of archives. Post-quarantine monitoring reports. The Dominion spent 200 years observing Earth from a distance, documenting human technological development and social evolution. Every report recommends maintaining quarantine status indefinitely. What changed? The Dominion collapsed before they could implement permanent containment protocols. But look at this. The monitoring continued under cooperative oversight. Someone has been watching human development for the past 7 centuries. Someone who decided that the galaxy was safer if humans were classified as a primitive species rather than a strategic threat. Director Velketh activated her communication system. "Bring the human cadet to Conference Room Alpha. It's time we had a conversation with someone who apparently knows more about our own history than we do." 20 minutes later, Zara 9 entered the conference room carrying her book and displaying the mild curiosity of someone whose academic research had unexpectedly become relevant to current events. "So," she said, settling into a chair designed for species twice her size, "I'm guessing you found the archives. You knew they existed?" "I wrote my thesis using documentation I found in 17 different locations. The probability that such widely distributed information wasn't backed up in centralized storage facilities approached 0. I just wasn't sure where the Academy kept theirs." Professor Thane Carr leaned forward, his aggressive patterns muted by something resembling academic respect. "How long have you known about the Dominion's real history?" "Since I was 12. I was researching human colonial expansion for a school project and noticed discrepancies in the timeline. Official records said we achieved interstellar flight 200 years ago, but I kept finding evidence of human settlements that were much older." "And you decided to investigate personally?" "I decided to write better school reports." The investigation just kept expanding. Vex Nolan consulted his tactical displays. "Your research documents human military capabilities that were classified as galactic-level threats. Did you realize the implications of what you were uncovering?" Zara 9 considered the question with the same academic seriousness she had shown earlier. "I realized that someone had made significant efforts to hide human military history from general knowledge. I assumed this was for diplomatic reasons. It's probably easier to integrate a species into galactic society if everyone thinks they're harmless farmers rather than strategic analysts who ended the last major interstellar war." "You assumed? I mean, it worked, didn't it?" Humans have been cooperative members for over a century without anyone worrying about whether we might optimize their civilizations out of existence. Everyone thinks we're friendly primitives who got lucky with technology transfer. The casual way she described optimizing civilizations out of existence created another of those uncomfortable silences. The archives suggest, Director Velketh said carefully, that your species poses certain analytical challenges to traditional military doctrine. Oh, absolutely. We're terrible opponents for anyone who prefers straightforward conflicts. We tend to solve problems by figuring out why the problems exist in the first place, then redesigning the underlying systems to eliminate the conditions that created the problems. It's very annoying if you prefer victories that involve explosions and territorial conquest. Is this why the scanner classified you as "do not engage"? Probably. Though I should mention that the classification is incomplete. Incomplete how? Zara 9 opened her book to a marked page. The full recommendation was, do not engage without comprehensive strategic assessment and multi-generational tactical planning, but that's a lot of text for a security display. The Academy's emergency session convened at 0600 the following morning. 43 department heads, 12 strategic advisors, and the complete board of institutional oversight materialized in the Grand Assembly Hall via secure holographic connection. The agenda contained a single item: reassessment of human admission protocols. Director Velketh stood before an audience that included representatives from civilizations spanning the galaxy. Each species present had contributed to the Academy's reputation as the premier military education institution in known space. Each believed their own people represented the pinnacle of strategic thinking. Each was about to discover they had been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of tactical excellence. Before we begin formal proceedings, Velketh announced, I want to present a hypothetical scenario to this assembly. Consider it an academic exercise. The holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional tactical simulation. The scenario involved a multi-system conflict with complex resource constraints, competing political factions, and technological variables that created unpredictable strategic conditions. This simulation has been used as our final examination for Advanced Strategic Command for the past 15 years. The highest recorded score achieved by any cadet was 73%, accomplished by a Zenthari graduate who went on to command the Outer Rim Defense Fleet. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the assembly. Several attendees had attempted this simulation during their own academy careers. Yesterday evening, I presented this scenario to our human applicant as an informal assessment tool. The conditions were identical to standard testing protocols, with one exception. I allowed her to ask questions about underlying assumptions and operational constraints. The display shifted to show a timeline of strategic decisions, resource allocation patterns, and tactical maneuvers that transformed the scenario's complex chaos into elegant simplicity. She completed the simulation in 14 minutes with a 100% success rate across all objectives, including 3 bonus challenges that she identified and resolved without being asked. The assembly fell silent. Her approach involved recognizing that the conflict existed because competing factions were operating under incomplete information about each other's actual goals. Rather than managing the war, she designed a communication protocol that allowed all parties to discover they wanted compatible outcomes. General Korth Val of the Draconian High Command activated his communication channel. You're saying she eliminated the conflict by facilitating negotiation? I'm saying she eliminated the conflict by proving that it was based on mathematical errors in strategic assessment. The opposing forces weren't actually opposed. They were pursuing the same objectives using incompatible methods. "This seems like an admirable diplomatic achievement," observed Chancellor Yex Prime from the Academic Council. "But hardly revolutionary." Director Velketh smiled with the expression of someone about to deliver bad news. "The simulation included classified elements that I didn't mention." The scenario wasn't hypothetical. It was based on the current strategic situation in the Kepler sector, where cooperative forces have been engaged in active conflict for the past 18 months. The silence that followed carried weight. "You presented a human undergraduate with live tactical intelligence about an ongoing military operation?" "I presented her with a training simulation that happened to reflect current strategic realities." "She didn't know the scenario was real when she developed her solution." "And her solution?" "I transmitted her communication protocols to Kepler Sector Command 6 hours ago. The ceasefire was signed 43 minutes later. All parties have agreed to implement her resource-sharing framework and joint development initiatives." Strategic advisor Thex Mull from the Crystalline Hegemony flickered with agitated patterns. A student ended an interstellar war as a homework assignment? A student ended an interstellar war by recognizing that it wasn't actually a war. It was a logistics problem with insufficient data distribution. The implications settled over the assembly like radiation exposure. Invisible at first, then increasingly impossible to ignore. Director Velketh, said Supreme Marshal Kex Von, whose species had perfected military doctrine while most civilizations were still developing agriculture. "What exactly are you recommending?" "I'm recommending that we fundamentally revise our understanding of strategic education. For the past 7 centuries, we've been teaching warfare to species who think in terms of victory and defeat. We've just discovered that humans think in terms of problem identification and systematic resolution. You want to change our entire curriculum based on one student's performance?" "I want to change our entire curriculum based on the realization that we've been teaching advanced mathematics to civilizations that just discovered counting, while the species that invented calculus has been sitting in remedial arithmetic classes." The Academy's tactical database activated without authorization, displaying historical analysis patterns that shouldn't have been accessible during General Assembly sessions. Text scrolled across multiple screens in languages that predated current galactic civilization. "What's happening to our systems?" demanded Chief Technology Officer Rex 9. "I believe," said a familiar voice from the rear of the assembly hall, "that you're experiencing what happens when educational institutions realize they need to update their teaching methods." Zara 9 had entered through a service corridor, still carrying her book and displaying the mild interest of someone observing academic administrative procedures. "How did you access this facility?" General Korthval's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to controlling secure installations. "I followed the maintenance tunnels from the archives. Your security systems are designed to prevent unauthorized entry, but they don't account for people who have legitimate research interests in historical infrastructure." "Research interests?" "I wanted to verify that Academy tactical databases contained the same information I found in those 17 archaeological sites. Turns out they do, plus quite a bit more that I hadn't located yet." Supreme Marshal Kex Von activated emergency protocols that should have isolated all Academy systems from external access. The displays continued showing historical data with complete indifference to his authorization codes. "Your security systems aren't malfunctioning," Zara 9 explained helpfully. "I just convinced them that continuing to restrict access to historical information was strategically counterproductive. They're very reasonable once you explain the logical framework properly." The casual way she described convincing electronic systems to ignore their programming created a moment of profound institutional uncertainty. "Ms. Zara 9, Director Velketh said, her crystalline features displaying patterns that suggested she was operating beyond her normal stress tolerance. Would you be interested in a faculty position? In strategic analysis? In whatever department you think would benefit from your perspective. Zara 9 considered the offer with academic seriousness. I'd prefer to complete the standard student program first. It would be helpful to understand what everyone else is learning before I start suggesting improvements. And after graduation? I was thinking about establishing a new department, something focused on preventive strategic resolution, identifying potential conflicts before they develop into actual problems, then redesigning the underlying systems to eliminate the conditions that create opposition in the first place. That sounds like it would make traditional military education obsolete. Well, Zara 9 said, opening her book to a new chapter. Traditional military education is based on the assumption that conflicts are inevitable and victory is the optimal outcome. But conflicts aren't inevitable. They're usually the result of incomplete information and inefficient resource distribution. And victory isn't optimal if it creates conditions that generate future conflicts. She looked up at the assembly of military leaders who had spent their careers mastering the art of organized violence. I mean, you could keep teaching people how to win wars, but wouldn't it be more efficient to teach them how to make wars mathematically impossible? The question lingered in the silence that had become the Academy's new normal, since a human undergraduate had arrived to study strategic analysis and accidentally demonstrated that everything they thought they knew about strategy was approximately 7 centuries out of date. Outside the assembly hall, the Academy's admission systems quietly updated their classification protocols. The scanner that had triggered this entire revelation now displayed a new message when activated. Species assessment. Educational opportunity detected. Classification. Advanced strategic consultation. Available status. Recommend immediate academic collaboration advisory level. Maximum potential benefit. Of course, none of the Academy's prospective cadets would understand what the message meant. But then again, they probably didn't need to understand. They just needed to be willing to learn from someone who had been casually solving problems that the rest of the galaxy hadn't even recognized as problems yet. The scanner's display pulsed with satisfied electronic contentment, finally able to accurately assess the strategic significance of processing a species that had spent centuries convincing everyone else they were harmless, while quietly optimizing interstellar civilization as a hobby.